Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code KNUCKLER. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. And hey, Christmas right around the corner. That for 2025 sounds like a pretty good gift to me. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests coming to a state near you. They're giving out boosts, slashing lines, handing out bonuses all day long. Get in those DFS player prop contests. Check it out. It's a fun platform. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 161 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. We got UFC Tampa on Saturday.
Break out the red panties.
And again, I should probably find another sound drop, considering that is now the voice of a litigated rapist. But, you know, we'll address that for the year of 2025. So, there's a lot of MMA action this week. This is the last UFC event of 2024. We've also got two Brave events, Invicta Cage Warriors, the PFL Europe Championships. For my picks on all that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Keep an eye out for my MMA DFS Value Picks article coming out on Friday afternoons. And come up to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about what you're doing, DFS-wise, gambling-wise, for UFC Tampa. And one quick note, you know, we'll hop right into it. But this past week, UFC 310, good for Alexandre Pantoja for defending the UFC flyweight title, the most underappreciated champion in the UFC. Making it look like easy work against Kaya Sakura. I still got love for the rising people coming over. And as Dana White hinted, I hope that continues to be, you know, a thing that happens. As rising fighters making the transition to the UFC, and, you know, maybe vice versa. You know, who knows? But Ryzen seems like a good organization. They've always seemed like a good organization to do business with. But Ian Gary, you know, comes up short against Shavkat. I think Ian Gary got a lot of respect out of that performance. Don't know if he necessarily gained fans, but it's hard to hate on him, you know, at the same level. So, you know, Shavkat, if anything, looked human, kind of like Ian Gary said. So that's one part. You know, the Nate Landwehr-Doohu Choi fight was so puzzling, especially if you went off my confidence interval from last week. Jesus, Doohu Choi looked fantastic. And then, you know, I can get past, because, you know, picking, like, Sterling on the money line. If you had Movsar by decision, which was another thing I threw out there, great. But, you know, that was a really close fight. There were some weird, like, statistics and, you know, different ways to measure the effectiveness of grappling in that fight. So he loses the unanimous decision. As much of a Brian Battle fan as I am, you know, he missed his weight by the amount that he did and then ends up winning that split decision, a fight that I actually thought he lost 29-28. And then the heartbreaker, Alexander Volkov. I don't use you know I'm conservative with the term robbery, but Alexander Volkov was robbed. Not that he did anything incredibly effective, but Gane definitely didn't. I could not. It just seems like because I was watching the fights with, you know, occasional guest on this show, my brother, Zach Grove. And for the moment, because we were also watching Kentucky mount a comeback on Gonzaga, at the time it was like, okay, well, obviously this is going to be a decision for Volkov, and had the decision on mute. Why is it every single time you say that it ends up being the other guy's hand that gets raised? It just kills me. Because not only do I think he was the rightful victor there, but as I was saying last week, Alexander Volkov is a guy that if things just went a little bit more right for, like on Saturday, this is a guy with the way heavyweight operates where this guy could fight for a title again, or he could fight for a title, or he could fight for an interim heavyweight title. And this loss is a tragic setback. I think Dana White would be fully justified, or, you know, the UFC brass would be fully justified and giving him a fight as if he won that one, because, that's going to go down as a loss, but who looked like the better fighter in that matchup? So that was brutal. So, a few decisions there that really hurt, but that one was an absolute heartbreaker. So anyway, we got 13 fights currently slated for UFC Tampa. And we are starting off with a UFC women's strawweight matchup between Piera Rodriguez and Josephine Knudsen. Piera Rodriguez, the plus 195 underdog. Knudsen, the minus 230 favorite. Let's start off with Piera Rodriguez, the underdog, coming off 2 straight losses to Jillian Robertson and Ariana Carnelosi. The last one was actually by DQ, a fight that she was actually doing quite well in. But she got subbed by Jillian Robertson. She was coming off, 3 straight unanimous decision wins before that. Against Kay Hansen, Sam Hughes, I feel like it's customary that if you fight one of them, you have to fight the other. Knudsen, on the other hand, born in 1996, she has not lost from the road to UFC to the Contender Series to her 2 UFC fights. She dominated Marnik Mann back in September of last year, outstriking her 81-8 with 3 takedowns, and she's coming off a 124-64 performance in the striking against Julia Pilastri. June of this year, she did get taken down 3 times. Every one of her wins that I just mentioned were all unanimous decision victories. So this is I wouldn't have expected Josephine Knudsen to be this heavy of a favorite. Honestly, I do have to favor her. Piera Rodriguez has faced a tougher, echelon of opponent for sure. Jillian Robertson made some pretty easy work of her. And I think just matchup wise, Piera's actually a little bit she's longer. They're both, around the same size. This is one where I think you could justify a couple of different things. I think that this is an undercard women's strawweight matchup between 2 fighters with different kinds of, levels of competition that they've faced. Kind of hard to compare. I wouldn't blame anybody for taking Piera Rodriguez plus 195, but Josephine Knudsen by decision minus 140, I think that's very logical too. I think that I probably prefer Knudsen by decision, but again, I can't blame you for Piera Rodriguez plus 195. I think from what we've seen Knudsen and Rodriguez do, I just think Josephine Knudsen has proven just more impressive marginally, especially the Marnik Mann and the Julia Pilastri fights. She's turned in some pretty dominant performances, and it doesn't necessarily matter if you get a few takedowns on her. She's pretty effective everywhere. I think it's a good matchup for her, but again, I do not blame anybody for Piera Rodriguez plus 195, but Knudsen by decision is just it's such a reasonable number. Next up, we've got a bantamweight matchup between Davy Grant and Ramon Taveras. Davy Grant is the minus 115 favorite. Ramon Taveras, the minus 105 underdog. Let's start off with Ramon Taveras. All right, so this is the guy who's had the saga with Serhi Saidi. Lost by first round knockout their first meeting on the Contender Series. Gets a first round knockout against Curtavius Romius, he's coming off another loss. He had the win on the Contender Series, then hopped back in November against Gaston Bolanos, and I was on Bolanos in that matchup, if you recall. But Taveras bounces back, has that split decision victory against Serhi Saidi, one that I recall not really agreeing with. It's just weird when someone has such a limited sample size at the UFC level and 2 of those fights are against the same person and one outcome you don't really trust. The other fight, it was 2 Contender Series fights, and I don't know if I really think he was the better fighter in his UFC debut. Davy Grant, on the other hand, coming off a split decision loss to Daniel Marcos. He did outstrike Marcos 70-48. But, the 2 wins before that, Davy Grant has fought such a higher echelon of opponent. You go back to March of 2021 even, because this guy's fought Chito Vera twice, beat him once. He's fought Chris Holdsworth. That's how far back you got to go for Davy Grant. But, wins over Jonathan Martinez in March 2021. He's beaten Luis Smolka. He's beaten Rafael Assunção. All of his UFC victories, besides his first one against Cheeto, has been inside the distance. Like Assunção, Luis Smolka, definitely guys that were like not in their prime in March of 2023 and May of 2022. But like Davy Grant, he's approaching 40 years old. That is, important. And he's going to be 9 years older than Ramon Tavares, about 9 years older. Now, even after fighting Adrian Yanez and Cheeto, Davy Grant has never been knocked out. He has only ever been finished by submission against like Manny Bermudez, Damian Stasiak, Chris Holdsworth was the last one. No, I think that's it. Normally, this is one where I just feel like going money line, because especially when, like, the dude that I feel a little bit better about, and I don't, over 2.5 rounds, that's minus 125. Under 2.5 is minus 105. That's so, everything about this fight is almost even money. I'm inclined to say, like, Davy Grant minus 115 seems like a good number. Of late, though, like, a 9-year age difference seems like a problem. I don't think you go by, Tavares by knockout would be, if I was taking a greater chance here, that's a plus 300. I don't know. Like, everything in my head is saying, like, Davy Grant can still handle Ramon Tavares, and I'm not super impressed with what Tavares has done up to this point. Can Davy Grant still handle a very entry-level UFC fighter? I still think so. Most likely when to finish this, too, I'd probably have to say Tavares by knockout. But, like, Davy Grant inside the distance is plus 250. I think there's some logic to that. I could see me using Davy Grant in DFS, but, like, again, the dude's pushing 40. I'm not going to be putting my unless you're a heavyweight, not putting much faith in guys of that age bracket. If I was going to go with anything here, I guess Davy Grant minus 115. And, like, I don't know, like, over 2.5 in what could end up being, like, a pretty fun fight, minus 125, that's decent, too. I don't know. I don't love that one with a 9-year age gap and almost polar opposite types of resumes there. Next up, we've got a women's flyweight matchup between Miranda Maverick and Jamie Lynn Horth. Jamie Lynn Horth, the plus 425 underdog. Miranda Maverick, the minus 600 favorite.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
And was this supposed to be something different? No, not that I'm seeing. Now that I'm saying it, remember, Buckley versus Ian Gary was originally supposed to be on this card. So, let's start off with Jamie Lynn Horth, all right? Winner of 2 of 3 fights at the UFC level. A win over Haley Cowan by unanimous decision, outstriking her 76-63. A loss by split decision to Veronica Hardy in a fight where the statistics were pretty much a dead heat, 43-43, a takedown each. And then a split decision win her last time out against Ivana Petrovic. One where I think I was on Petrovic and was disappointed by that outcome, but still thought Horth was probably the rightful victor if memory serves. That one was razor thin in the statistics as well. That was November of 2024. She was born in 1990. Miranda Maverick, 7 years younger than Jamie Lynn Horth. After her loss to Jasmine Jasudavicius, the one that catapulted Jasmine into the rankings, June of 2023 at UFC 289, she is on a 3-fight winning streak, and she has won 5 of her last 6 fights against Sabina Mazo, Shanna Young, Priscilla Kuchera, Andrea Lee, and Dion Barbosa. So, one, who's the more likely of these two to finish the fight? I say Miranda Maverick, quite obviously. But, like, I think that we have seen, Jamie Lynn Horth landed those 76 strikes against Haley Cowan. Haley Cowan, who, had a short-lived run. Especially over the course of 3 rounds, like Jamie Lynn Horth, to have 2 split decisions, coming off with a win in one of them, that's good. It's just like, when it's getting that close and now you're taking a big leap up in competition, that doesn't bode well. Now, maybe Jamie Lynn Horth can slow this fight down a little bit, keep the statistics on Miranda Maverick's side from piling up, and, force a closer decision than we'd maybe be used to. But at the end of the day, I still think that Miranda Maverick, she's the younger fighter. She's the much more dynamic fighter. She has the, more dangerous skill set to where she could actually finish this fight. I think Miranda Maverick probably wins this fight like 85 times out of 100, leaving some room there for some uncertainty. Miranda Maverick by decision, that's minus 275. I think that's reasonable, honestly. Over 2.5 in this fight is minus 450. But if you want to roll the dice, I think you go Miranda Maverick by submission plus 550. We've seen that before. And, Miranda Maverick's still pretty young. She's been around for a good amount of time. But I think you leave the fact that I think that, sometimes we see a version that doesn't look like it was, ready for whoever was in front of her that day. Sometimes you see what you think is a more improved version. So I don't know. Miranda Maverick by submission plus 550. That makes it a little bit more interesting. But, Maverick minus 275 by decision and Maverick by split decision plus 750. That's if Jamie Lynn Horth can do Jamie Lynn Horth things and keep this fight a little bit closer than we would expect. Just like when two of your fights end up almost dead statistical heats, and not a whole lot happened in those two fights, like a combined 72 strikes for her across those two fights with 3 takedowns, and her opponents, pretty much did the exact same thing. Maybe it does end up being a split decision, especially when we're traveling outside of Las Vegas and with the way the judging has been lately. I guess it doesn't matter whether it's in Vegas or not. So anyway, and I can definitely, make my way to seeing, Miranda Maverick in DFS, but, I don't know. The weird matchups like this, where it's a heavy favorite on an undercard, I've been way less enthused about DFS-wise lately. Next up, we got a featherweight matchup between Miles Johns and Felipe Lima. Felipe Lima is the minus 235 favorite. Miles Johns, the plus 200 underdog. Felipe Lima is coming off a win in his UFC debut June of 2024 against Muhammad Naimov. Naimov, who was 3-2 in the UFC. And in that fight, he outstruck him 37-30. They each had a takedown. He got him with a rear naked choke in round 3, born in 1998. Miles Johns, only 4 years older. He's actually won 3 of his last 4 fights against Vince Morales by unanimous decision, but that was back in 2022. He has now won 2 fights in the year 2024. Unanimous decision over Ultimate Fighter runner-up Cody Gibson, and a unanimous decision over Douglas Silva de Andrade this last time out. The activity definitely wasn't there for a little bit, where he only fought once from November 2022 to March 2024, and it ended up being a no contest against Dan Argueta. But this is still a guy that has won 7 of his 10 fights in the UFC, with also wins over Anderson Dos Santos, Kevin Natividad, and that's counting the Contender Series. But, this has been a nice 2-fight winning streak for Miles Johns. He is, rock solid. And anytime he's a 15-2 professional, not that old. Lima is 13-1 as a pro, 26 years old. In his career, 3 wins by submission, 4 by knockout, 6 by decision. He came in as the Octagon Bantamweight champion and the Fight Club Rush Bantamweight champion, 2 organizations that carry a good amount of weight over there in the foreign lands. So, I think, it's very reasonable to say Felipe Lima, is a favorite here. He looked really good in that UFC debut against Muhammad Naimov. Miles Johns has been, finished in his 2 real losses in the UFC, a knockout and a submission to John Castaneda and Mario Batista. I think, reasonably, who's the most likely to get a finish here? I would still have to say Felipe Lima. Miles Johns does not typically light up scoreboards with his statistics. Lima inside the distance That is plus 190. I think that is a solid number. You can hit that. But never, ever sleep on Miles Johns as an underdog. Miles Johns.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
Plus 200. This guy has enough mileage on him in the UFC and enough quality wins to, be able to take 35, 40 of these out of 100. I mean, Miles Johns is a guy where you just land, 25 to 50 strikes, get a couple of takedowns. He's just a rock-solid, kind of well-rounded fighter. Has some decent power, at least did a few years ago. He's just solid. He's just one of those dudes that, when he's a minus... he hasn't taken a bunch of, big steps up in competition. It's all been pretty consistent. So, but plus 200, I don't know, that's just very tempting on Miles Johns. And, I could see Lima, separating if he's able to land some bigger shots. But, I think that if this goes to the judges' scorecards, it could end up being close. Johns by split decision is plus 1,000. Lima by split decision is plus 800. I don't know. Those are always fun to play around with now for as often as they're happening. But I don't need to go method of victory with Miles Johns. Plus 200 on the money line is well good enough. But Lima plus 190 inside the distance, I think that's very reasonable too. If I'm going with anybody in DFS, it's probably Felipe Lima. But, it'd be different if, he didn't submit Muhammad Naimov in his UFC debut very recently. Muhammad Naimov has wins over Jamie Malarkey and over Nathaniel Wood. So that was a meaningful win in his UFC debut. And it's not as big of a step up or a test for Lima as normally Miles Johns in your second UFC fight would be. Next up, we got a featherweight matchup between Sean Woodson and Fernando Padilla. Sean Woodson is the minus 155 favorite. Fernando Padilla, the plus 135 underdog. Let's talk first about Fernando Padilla, winner of 2 of 3 fights in the UFC. A first-round knockout in his UFC debut over Juicy J, Julian Erosa. Lost a unanimous decision to Kyle Nelson last September, getting outstruck 82-72. He is coming off a first-round Darce choke victory over Luis Pojuelo. Pojuelo, by the way, only a winner of a fight in the Contender Series. He's 8-2 as a professional. So, to start off your career against Kyle Nelson and Julian Erosa, that's not being thrown to the Wolves, but it's being thrown to, the Coyotes. Something like that. Born in 1996, El Valiente is the nickname. Solid stuff. Sean Woodson will actually have the reach advantage by 2 inches, 78-76 in this featherweight fight. Sean Woodson, winner of 5 of his last 6 fights, has not lost since he fought Julian Erosa and lost by submission June of 2020. It was a different Julian Erosa that they both faced, in fairness, but he's only lost once in the UFC. Wins over Terrence McKinney, Kyle Bochniak, who he landed 111 strikes on. Even against Julian Erosa, he got a knockdown, 106 strikes. He just got subbed in the 3rd round. Wins over Yusuf Zaleo, Colin Anglin. Then had the split draw with Luis Saldana, August of 2022. Now he's coming out 3 straight decision victories over Dennis Bajuka. That was August of 2023, 71-42 in the striking, 4 takedowns. Split decision over Charles Air Jourdain, 80-60 in the striking with a takedown. And then outstruck Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres May of this year in round 2, a unanimous decision, 101-82 in the striking department. So, yeah, I think, this is another one where I think it's very reasonable that Sean Woodson is a favorite. Now, I think minus 155 is actually a fairer number than I kind of expected. Padilla has faced competition of a similar rung that, to Woodson and to guys Sean Woodson has faced. I think not having the reach advantage here is going to be a big deal against Padilla. That's a good thing for Sean Woodson. He's found a solid rhythm here over the last 3 fights. And again, hasn't lost since June of 2020 in the UFC. This is a guy, too, that I can see using in DFS. Especially over his last 3. At least 71 strikes, up to 101. Even when he only had 71 only, he had 4 takedowns to supplement that. This is a guy that, for the most part, comes out on the right side of split decisions. And you can't do the math on the Julian Erosa fight because, again, that was a different Juicy J that each of them faced. So, I think, similar, if Fernando Padilla doesn't, now, Fernando Padilla, if you want to be sneaky and say, Padilla by submission, maybe catching Woodson later in the fight, kind of like Julian Erosa did, and I think you'd still have to survive a good amount of strikes, quite an onslaught en route to that. But Padilla by submission plus 625, that's a flyer. But Woodson by decision plus 125, you land your 70, your 80 strikes plus, and then you get, anywhere from 1 to 4 takedowns. I think that's all it would take for a unanimous decision. I think Woodson money line minus 155. I think Woodson by split decision historically plus 550, not a bad way to go either. But either way, I think all these numbers are very fair on Sean Woodson. And, if he's not too pricey in DFS, I don't think he will be, and I could definitely see myself including him. Next up, we've got a lightweight matchup between Joel Alvarez and Drakkar Klose. Drakkar Klose is the plus 325 underdog. Joel Alvarez, the minus 425 favorite. Let's talk about Drakkar Klose first. Crazy, that this guy is that heavy of an underdog when you really 2 losses in the UFC out of, 11 fights, only 2 losses. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. He has won 7 of his last 8 fights dating back to July of 2018 with a win over Bobby Green, over Brandon Jenkins, over Rafa Garcia, Joe Selecki, and Joaquim Silva. The only loss in that time was March of 2020 at UFC 248 against Beneil Dariush. So, Drakkar Klose, born in 1998, I will still say.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
And he only fought once in 2023. This is going to be his second fight of 2024. He did get hurt against Joaquim Silva back at UFC 301. Still ended up getting the unanimous decision, outstriking him 70 to 59. Ended that fight against Joe Selecki quick, as you will recall, by a first-round knockout slam. So this guy wins in a variety of, not necessarily by submission, by knockout, by decision, but even, some of his knockout wins, some of them are, a little bit outside the box there. Joel Alvarez is 5 years younger. He will have a 7-inch reach advantage. This is a guy that has also had a phenomenal run in the UFC. He lost his UFC debut to Damir Ismagulov back in February 2019. Since then, he has won 6 of 7 fights, all inside the distance. As I recall, 3 knockouts and 3 submissions. Beautiful. Let's see. Yeah. And he's beaten Thiago Moises, Joe Duffy, Mark Diakish, Elvis Brenner. That's his 2-fight winning streak is over Diakish and Elvis Brenner. August of 2024 is when that fight happened. He was outstriking him 95 to 45 en route to that. His only loss since February of 2019 is Arman Sarukian. Somehow, for as impressive of a single loss that Drakkar Klose has in such a long period of time, actually a more recent loss than the younger Joel Alvarez. Joel Alvarez still has the loss to the more impressive lightweight contender. So, yeah, I was hoping Joel Alvarez wouldn't be this favored. I'm not particularly surprised. I do think Joel Alvarez probably wins this fight, I think he probably wins this fight 80, 85 times out of 100. I think is fair. Joel Alvarez, even though we don't necessarily see it in Drakkar Klose's, fight history in the UFC, I think the chances that this, because the odds on this one are not over under 2.5, it's over under 1.5. Over 1.5 minus 155. I think I'd probably prefer that to under 1.5 plus 125. Joel Alvarez, historically a guy that, as I recall, finishes fights in all kinds of rounds. His last 2 fights were finished in the third and the second. Before that, it was like 3 straight first rounds, but like a second-round knockout against Danilo Bellardo. So I do think like over 1.5 minus 155 makes sense. If I'm going like Joel Alvarez inside the distance, that's minus 160. Absolutely hit it. Love Joel Alvarez. But Jakar Close, I think like kind of how nice his run in the UFC has been, kind of flies under the radar. And it definitely is going to in comparison to Joel Alvarez, especially after this Saturday. Next up, we've got a lightweight matchup between Ottman Azatar and Michael Johnson.
Break out the red panties.
Azatar, the plus 185 underdog. Michael Johnson, the minus 220 favorite. Let's start with the long-running veteran of the sport, 23-19 professional Michael Johnson. Loved this guy back when he came off of the Ultimate Fighter. Actually, yeah. So, Michael Johnson has been in so many entertaining fights. He's beaten Edson Barboza. He's beaten Dustin Poirier, Joe Lozon, Melvin Gillard. And those names get far less frequent and far less impressive the more time that goes on. I mean, he has lost now 6 of his last 9 fights, but like winner of 3 of his last 5. Unbelievably. Alan Patrick, a second-round knockout, beat Mark Dykes by unanimous decision, and he beat Darius Flowers in February this year by unanimous decision, outstriking him 61-33 with 4 takedowns. This dude was born in 1986. Losses in that, since March of 2019. Losses to Josh Emmett, Stevie Ray, Thiago Moises, Clay Guida, Jamie Malarkey, and Diego Ferreira. Ottman Azatar, born in 1990. This guy does not have a win in the UFC since September of 2020 when he got a first-round knockout over Kama Worthy. The other one was against Timu Pakalin. Remember that guy? Of course you don't. All right? So that speaks kind of to what Ottman Azatar has been up to. He's also been knocked out twice in that time, November 2022 and July 2023, against Matt Frivola and Francisco Prado. We know what this is. This is the UFC. Especially they've been making kind of the goodbye tour with so many guys from this era. Michael Johnson's been around since 2010. And, I think they want to see Michael Johnson win. A lot of MMA fans do. Hell, a lot of MMA fans also, don't like Michael Johnson. That's okay. I don't want to get too crazy with this. If it was someone else who has just been a little bit more active, but not Azatar, and he's not young enough for me to think that makes too much of it. They have the same reach. That's something. Michael Johnson is 2 inches taller. I think that will kind of matter. It tends to for him. But, under 1.5 is plus 110 here. I think Michael Johnson could get this done in the first round. Or do enough damage and finish it off early in the second. Michael Johnson by knockout, plus 165. That's touchable. Minus 220 seems crazy for a guy like Michael Johnson with that much mileage on him. So I don't feel crazy good about anything in this fight. I do think Michael Johnson probably wins this fight 65, maybe 70 times out of 100, closer to 65. If I'm going Michael Johnson, I'm going by knockout. But this is one where, when the guy you feel easily the strongest about was born in the 80s, that's getting more and more troublesome every single day, and as Michael Johnson's record was approaching 500, if it wasn't for this recent run, he would possibly be there. Oh, all these guys born in 1986, and my God, everything on the last card with Weidman and Guida, guys in their 40s, for God's sake. And God, have you seen the Global Fight League's draft pool that they're going to have? Guys that were Pride champions are going to be fighting. Anyway, I digress. Next up, we have a light heavyweight matchup between Navajo Sterling and Tuco Tokos. Tokos is the plus 550 underdog. Navajo Sterling, the minus 800 favorite. Let's start off with Tuco Tokos, right? If you just looked at, like, the area, like the picture of his chest and above, you would think this guy's easily a heavyweight. 34 years old, born in London, England. 6 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, 2 by decision in his career. So, 1 UFC fight, he got rear naked choked by Umar Sy in the first round. That was back in May of this year. Came in from Fury FC. I mean, like, this is the other thing, too. Like, he was on road to UFC. He got knocked out by Ming Yang Zhang. A few fights in Fury FC against opponents with, you know, reasonable records. He also, like, had a couple of Bellator fights. They didn't go his way. Every time this guy has stepped up from the from the mid kind of levels of Fury FC, and I guess technically March of 2022, he was their light heavyweight champion, but a lot of fight time has passed for him since then. Every time he takes just, you know, a step up to try to make it at this UFC level, it doesn't go well for him. Navajo Sterling, 5-0 as a professional, 27 years old, fighting out of New Zealand. This guy came in from Hex Fight Series, and he was their light heavyweight champion there. Now, like, the combined record of his last couple of opponents was 17-16. He beat Sam Kai to get that Hex Fight Series light heavyweight title. He was also the champion at Shuriken Fight Series. So he was dominating that area of the world. He's got Muay Thai and pro kickboxing experience. You love to see that. And he won by second-round knockout against Philip Latu on the Contender Series September of this year. So, I mean, he's undefeated as an MMA fighter, and he's 27 years old. Again, like, this is one where I wouldn't have thought maybe it would be this much of a favorite, but I think you kind of got to rock with it. Unless you're talking about a guy like Austin Lane against someone with a very clear deficiency that you know you can exploit, that the other guy can exploit, then it's not a situation where I think the guy who keeps failing to break through is going to break through. So, you know, Tuco Tokos, it'd be cool if you did end up getting a win here after so many, you know, the chances at Road to UFC, your UFC debut, Bellator, but
Don't do this. You cannot do this, you know?
and for some reason, it isn't showing me the method of victory, all the prop bets for this one on Bet Online. But under 1.5 is plus 130. I definitely think that is one to look at. I think Tuco Tokos is going to be looking for a big shot, too. I think Sterling is just the far more skilled guy at finding that shot. And whatever it ends up being, I think the smartest thing to do here is Sterling by knockout. And under 1.5, if you can pair that together, you know, like Sterling by knockout in the first half of the fight, I think that is a reasonable thing to do. But Tuco Tokos, he's going to put himself in position to either get a knockout and get knocked out, and I think the latter is by far the most likely scenario. So all those things I just said about Navajo Sterling, hit it. You know I love the guys from Shuriken and from Hex Fight Series. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Adrian Yanez and Daniel Marcos. Adrian Yanez is the plus 190 underdog. Marcos, the minus 225 favorite. Just on, like, the names that I just heard come out of my mouth, those odds seem a bit surprising. Let's talk about Daniel Marcos, though. Now, like, this guy's pedigree has kind of escaped me, I guess, like how good it's been. Hasn't lost in the UFC. His fight against Eric Kaling ended up being a no contest. He was outstriking him 81-45 in that fight. But otherwise, wins against Brandon Lewis by decision in the Contender Series with a knockdown and 81 strikes. Got a second-round knockout against Simon Oliveira at UFC 283. A split decision against Davey Grant. This is the one where he got outstruck 70-48. And then he's coming off a unanimous decision victory over John Castaneda, June of this year, outstriking him 98-60 with a knockdown. This is one of those guys, like, you know, especially landing the 80, 90 strikes. You love to see it, especially for DFS purposes. But, you know, the knockdowns, it's not exactly matching. You'd think there'd be more than a single knockout so far in his UFC run for how, like, hard this guy hits, how effective his strikes are. But, what that does tell us is that his strikes do mean something. His 80 to 98 strikes, that means a lot. It means that you got hit hard on the way there. Born in 1993 with a 69-inch reach, Yanez, also born in 1993, he'll have a 1-inch reach advantage. And this is the tough one. Like, I mean, Yanez, been in the UFC since August of 2020. He's only lost twice. Those 2 losses came to Rob Font and Jonathan Martinez, both by knockout. And remember, his legs got absolutely chewed up by Jonathan Martinez. But he's got wins over Randy Costa, Davey Grant, that was a split decision where it was 100 to 98 in the striking. First round knockout over Tony Kelly. In fact, every single one of his UFC wins, except for the Davey Grant split decision, has been a knockout. After those 2 losses to Font and to Jonathan Martinez, he got a first-round knockout over Vinicius Salvador, May of 2024. So, this is one, again, like the over-under in this fight is 2.5 rounds. Under 2.5 plus 110. You can hit that. Now, maybe they're going to be a little, maybe these guys are going to have to be hesitant of what each other can do. I think that they're going to have to be careful. Marcos, shows he can hurt you. It doesn't necessarily result in a knockout every time. Yanez, he's crafty, has always been crafty. Very well, like, this fight could end in a knockout. Styles make these kinds of fights. It's just crazy. Like, I definitely think Marcos is for real. He's looked great in his time in the UFC. And my concern is, we haven't ever had to see Yanez rack up too much volume. But he did when he had to against Davey Grant. Everything else has never made it that far. So, I think that this is going to be a fun fight. I think that it's very likely there's, close to 200 strikes landed between the 2 of them. I think, Marcos to win a decision, that's plus 200. I think that's maybe a little bit of a sneakier one. I don't think, I would go a method of victory for Adrian Yanez because I think plus 190 is a pretty tempting number. Not to just compare their performances against Davey Grant. That doesn't matter as much. But, Adrian Yanez, I'm not going to, pretend that this guy, sucks because he lost to Rob Font and to Jonathan Martinez. Maybe we overinflated Jonathan Martinez's value after that fight. But he bounced right back and got a first-round knockout over Vinicius Salvador this year. It's not like Salvador's had a good time in the UFC. Definitely not. But at least Yanez got back in winning ways. So, Marcos by decision in a fight where, either... I think, if there's a face that's messed up by the end of this, it could probably be Adrian Yanez's. But Adrian Yanez was doing really good work against Jonathan Martinez before his legs just got chopped to all hell. So, Marcos by decision, plus 200, maybe over 2.5. Now, I'm forgetting the over-unders here. Forget that one. I think there's too many things that could happen in this one. But, Marcos by decision, plus 200, or Yanez money line, plus 190. I think that, even if you are really buying into Daniel Marcos, you still have to say he wins 60 of these fights out of 100. On the other end of the spectrum there, this could be a 50-50 fight. Next up, we've got a light heavyweight matchup between Vitor Petrino and Dustin Jacoby. Dustin Jacoby is the plus 235 underdog. Petrino, the minus 275 favorite. All right, so last time out, Vitor Petrino gets subbed in round 1 against Anthony Lionheart Smith.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
He had entered the rankings. He was off a 5-fight winning streak that included wins over Marcin Prachnio, Modestas Bukauskas, and Tyson Pedro. Looking back, the Pedro win was not super impressive. It was thorough, but not it was a big leap up that was kind of contingent on is Anthony Smith done? And, who knows if Anthony Smith is ever really done. Seems like he is after that performance Saturday against Dominic Reyes. But, again, Again, fighters out there, for the love of God, quit fighting under tragic circumstances. All sympathy extended to anybody fighting in those circumstances, but it's not a good spot for your head to be in, as we have seen. Anyway, this is going to be an important bounce-back spot for Vitor Petrino. Another guy with history in the UFC light heavyweight rankings, that is Dustin Jacoby, who will actually be at a 1-inch reach disadvantage here in this fight. He is 9 years older than Vitor Petrino. And there was a time, in that 4-fight winning streak for Jacoby where he beat Darren Stewart, John Allen, Michael Alexijuk, Da Woon Jung, and then a fight where I thought he was the rightful victor against Khalil Roundtree, October of 2022. That could have been a really impressive 5-fight winning streak. But since that time, the wheels have kind of fallen off. He lost the decision to Azamat Murzakanov. He ends up getting the first-round knockout over Kennedy Nzechukwu, who looks so much better at heavyweight. Does he look better at heavyweight, or does he look better by comparison? I think a little bit of both. But now he has lost 2 straight again to Alonzo Minifield. Dustin Jacoby lands his volume, but, he just got, in even his last 2 decision losses, he's got knocked down by Azamat and Alonzo. And then he got knocked out in the first round by Dominic Reyes at UFC Louisville, June of this year. So, how exactly this happens, I suppose that's anybody's guess. If I was going on this one, my time in betting on the reliability and the volume of Dustin Jacoby is now easily over. I don't want to get, maybe the fight against Anthony Smith was just a hair too early, and Anthony Smith, has shown the ability to draw some more gas out of the tank in some weird situations. But my time betting on the reliability and the volume of Dustin Jacoby is done. Vitor Petrino does scare me a little bit at minus 275. I don't feel super strongly about this one. These are 2 guys that just worry me for, all the different contrasting reasons we've talked about. If I'm picking one here, I'd say, Vitor Petrino probably wins this one now, 70 times out of 100. So I don't feel crazy about either of these 2 numbers. But, Petrino inside the distance, minus 125. If there's one I'm hitting, it's that one. And it'd be just more fun, Petrino, just, get a win over a name like this, get back in a little bit of that conversation. There's maybe some more fights to be made at light heavyweight. Next up, okay, we got 3 fights left, and this is the people's main event. If that person is named Brady Grove.
Break out the red panties.
Because we have a flyweight matchup between Bruno Silva and Manel Starboy Colby. Starboy is the minus 365 favorite. Bruno Silva, the plus 300 underdog. And let's just consult the UFC rankings real quick here at flyweight. So, by the way, Joshua Van, Kaya Sakura, they are now ranked flyweights. Bruno Silva is ranked 12th. Manel Colby is at number 9, right behind Steve Erceg. And even though it hasn't worked out for a lot of the prospects that were hoping to make their way to a title run, and hell, it looks like Davison Figueiredo might come back down and fight Pantoja for the belt, there's still the Royvals, the Morenos. Albazi's at number 3, and what was he got pieced up by Moreno, but whatever. Kai Kara France has gotten cheated on so many occasions. On multiple occasions, especially that fight with Amir Albazi. Tatsuro Taira is not going to go away. Definitely not concerned about Alex Perez, but Asuman Bayev, Erceg, Joshua Van in particular, whatever Kaya Sakura ends up doing, because he could definitely go up to bantamweight, and I think, that's a little bit more competitive. I think there's some more fun fights to be made for him, especially considering Starboy is in the flyweight division. Those 2 have history, but anyway, that's where Starboy and Bruno Silva currently, fall in the UFC flyweight rankings. Starboy is going to be the favorite here. Let's talk about Bruno Silva first. All right, so Bruno Silva lost his first 3 fights. One was a no contest against Khalid Taha that got overturned after an arm triangle at the hands of Khalid Taha. Then he lost 2 decisions against David Dvorak and Tajiro Lembekov. He is now on a 4-fight winning streak where he has finished every single fight, 3 in the second round, 1 in the first against JP Buys. That one does not mean a whole lot. Then a first-round knockout over Victor Rodriguez, a second-round rear naked choke over Tyson Nam, and then a second-round knockout over Cody Durden July of this year. The Cody Durden win, that's meaningful for sure. Tyson Nam, at the time that they fought, he was about 40 years old. He was about to turn 40 pretty soon. Tyson Nam, a name that, at one point and carried a lot more weight, but the Cody Durden win does solidify Bruno Silva, and the fact that he's finished these last 4 fights has been quite impressive. Starboy, you broke my heart in so many ways over the last few years. The fight against Nicolau, which it was very easy to argue that he should have won. Having to fight Pantoja in your UFC debut is just brutal. But he had that 4-fight winning streak as well over Ode Osborne, who he knocked out, Zaga Zumagulov, who he knocked out, David Dvorak by unanimous decision, where he looked his best and against like the best opponent that he's faced so far. And then the Felipe Dos Santos win, where he was just kind of messing around, which is something that is frustrating about him. Like, you let Felipe Dos Santos as a last-second replacement land 99 strikes. You land your 112, you get a knockdown, you get the win. But this dude's head, the altercations he's been in, with the fights that didn't end up happening, the weight stuff, then you get your shot. This is a fight that could get you a title shot. Against Muhammad Makayev, a fight that was there was heat behind, and then Makayev ends up getting bounced just because he's apparently an asshole. Is all the the sentiment that was spread around. But dude, that fight was so close. It was 29-28 on 2 judges' scorecards, and there was so little happening in that fight. And you were doing so well at Damn it, I just realized that loop back was not on the entire time, so I don't know if any of those sound bites played. Here.
Break out the red.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie.
And that last boo is for me. How could I have forgotten to press loop back before I started? Anyway. If Manel Kape just would have thrown a few more punches in that fight with Muhammad Makayev, he could have won it. That's all that fight was going to turn on. It would have been such a difference maker. This guy was supposed to have so many fun fights. So when he finally got that shot against Makayev, that was just a very frustrating fight to watch go down. So, my heart says Manel Kape by decision, probably. Bruno Silva, has not been finished for real, not one that counts in the UFC, and certainly even the no contest, not a way that I'm worried about Starboy pulling off. I think that these two, if they get into a scrap, that's awesome. And then, that kind of gives Bruno Silva his best chance. Starboy is a very good, dynamic striker. And when he chooses to do his best, he's really good. Manel Kape by decision, minus 120, probably the best way to go. We still haven't seen Starboy finished in the UFC. I think, who's the most likely to actually, get a finish in this one? I'd say because I think Bruno Silva just has a couple, more tricks in his sleeve on a well-rounded basis. Silva, inside the distance, that is plus 550. That's not horrible at all. This one, though, I'm hesitant just because, like, I know I love Starboy so much, but he just does things that just bother me. You want to root for him so bad, and he just doesn't seem to want you to. But, like, if I'm going Starboy, it's by decision minus 120. This would be a really meaningful win. And, you know, there's a lot of fights still to be made at flyweight. What they do with the flyweight title, that's one thing. But there's still plenty of fights to be made at flyweight. It does mean, though, that you're going to have to face one of these young killers. Because one of the young guys that you just faced, Starboy, he was the least killer of all of them. You know, like having to fight Albazi, Tyrasso, Amabayev, that's a different thing. So this would be a big win. I'm going to be rooting for him. Him by decision, I think, is the most reasonable. If you're going Bruno Silva, and I could see this being a split, too. Like, Starboy by split plus 900. Could see that happening. If I'm going inside the distance, I think you go Bruno Silva. I think plus 550 is a fair number. I think Starboy does win this fight, like, anywhere from 65 to 75 times out of 100, depending on whether he decided that he actually wants to win this fight or not. All right. And now, we are to the co-main event of the evening. And it is a featherweight matchup between Cub Swanson and Billy Quarantillo. Quarantillo, Billy Q is the minus 155 favorite. Cub Swanson, the plus 135 underdog. Let's start with Cub. Guy's been around in the WEC since 2007. Who hasn't this guy fought at flyweight? He's beaten Dustin Poirier, Dennis Seaver, Jeremy Stevens, Charles Oliveira. That was the same winning streak, by the way. He's fought Max Holloway. He's fought Frankie Edgar. He beat Doo Ho Choi. He's fought Ortega. He fought Frankie Edgar again, Renato Moicano, Shane Burgos. I mean, this guy continues to have really entertaining scraps now that he is over 40 years old. He's actually won 2 of his last 4 fights against Darren Elkins by first-round knockout. Now, that was December of 2021. And a unanimous decision against Hakeem Dawodu, August of 2023. The 2 losses in that time are a knockout against Jonathan Martinez. He also had to fight Giga Chikadze and got knocked out in the first round. Then he's coming off a split decision loss to Andre Touchy-Feely at UFC 303 June of this year. Billy Q, winner of 2 of his last 4 as well. It's been win-loss for him, you know, for the last 4 years or so after starting his UFC career with a 4-fight winning streak over Kamela Kirk, Jacob Kilburn, Spike Carlisle, and Kyle Nelson. But he's beaten Alexander Hernandez by second-round knockout December of 2022 at UFC 282, and then a unanimous decision victory over Damon Jackson August of 2023, outstriking him 100 to 67. Got taken down 3 times. He's coming off a submission loss to Yusuf Zalal, and that seemed worse than it was at the time because Yusuf Zalal was fresh off of those, you know, several losses and a almost 2-year layoff from the UFC. But now Yusuf Zalal is on a 3-fight winning streak, and that loss for Billy Q is aging quite nicely. It's not as bad as we thought. The other loss was a first-round knockout to Edson Barbosa. That was back in April of 2023. So Cub has not gotten a knockout since 2021. That was against another elder statesman in Darren Elkins. You know, didn't knock out Kron Gracie. That was a scrap. You know, like, I think, like, Billy Q can absolutely get a knockout in this fight. This could be, like, a bloody, drag-out brawl for sure. I think the more likely of the two to get the knockout is Billy Q. That's plus 275. And I think Cub by knockout plus 400. I do not like that number. If Cub wins this, I think that it could actually be, like, Cub by split decision plus 850. You know, this one's just a little closely handicapped. And in that situation, like, I think Billy Q wins this fight like 65 to 70 times out of 100. Being the guy that was not born in the 80s and was, in fact, no, he was born in the 80s. Billy Q was born in 1988. That is super surprising, especially when you compare how long each of these two have been around this level. But way less mileage and way less damage on Billy Q. You know, being able to get a split decision, you know, force it to a split decision against Andre Feely, that's still something nice for Cub Swanson. But, like, you know, Quarantillo has those miles left on him. The wins against Hernandez and against Damon Jackson, this is well within his range. You know, this, and hold on. Yeah, this is being fought at featherweight. So I think there's just a little bit outside of Cub's range at this point in his career, being over 40 years old. So, like, again, Billy Q plus 275. If I was going Cub, I'd go by, like, split decision plus 850. But, like, Billy Q plus minus 155, that is plenty good. I don't think you need to do any better than that or take any risk greater than that. Minus 155 is solid. Next up, we are to the main event of the evening and what will be the last UFC fight of 2024.
Break out the red panties.
And it is a welterweight matchup between Joaquin Buckley and Colby Covington. What? Colby's doing what?
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
Colby Covington, the guy who fought 5 times since December of 2019, then September 2020, November 2021, March of 2022, last fight, UFC 296, an unfortunately close fight and boring fight between Colby Covington and Leon Edwards at UFC 296 for the welterweight belt. This guy's most recent win, UFC 272, March of 2022, unanimous decision over Jorge Masvidal. His second most recent win, Tyron Woodley by knockout September of 2020. And he had that great winning streak from 2016 to 2019. He beat Damian Maia and RDA and Robbie Lawler because he won that interim belt against RDA. There's only been 3 people that have beaten him since December of 2015. It's Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards. What a weird story where it's like everybody knows this guy is apparently very nice in person. The whole crazy character he does, it's played out, but it still kind of works. You know, people still want to see him lose. That's all Colby needs. And of all things, after waiting for these big money, big interest fights for so long, in what was like a time in his career where like he could have even had more shots at the title. He could have won the title if there was more activity at welterweight. It was kind of like it was with Izzy and Robert Whittaker for so long. There was a clear number 1, that was Usman. Colby Covington was a clear number 2, occupying a tier of his own. And if it wasn't for Kamaru Usman, we could be talking about Colby Covington having that championship run that Kamaru Usman had. It's crazy, and I'm glad that he is. I'm glad that he's stepping in and making this an interesting fight night main event. But he's going to be fighting Joaquin Buckley. 6 years younger. He'll have a 4-inch reach advantage. Since coming down from middleweight, Joaquin Buckley has looked fantastic. All right, so, I mean, even considering that, like, since September of 2021, and if you will recall, you have to go back even further. His second UFC fight after his loss in his debut to Kevin Holland was that knockout of the year against Impa Kasangane, who went on to great things in PFL. But he's now won 5 fights in a row. Knockout over Andre Fiallo, which doesn't really count. And he got knocked out by Chris Curtis. That was another one. He had to fight Nasruddin Imavov at middleweight. That's a tough one. But, and, you know, the whole thing with Abdul Razak Al Hassan, you know, interesting competition. But now, beat Alex Morono by unanimous decision. He knocked out Vicente Luque. Beat Nursultan Ruziboev by unanimous decision, now striking him 86-31, 4 takedowns and a knockdown. And he's coming off the 3rd round knockout against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at UFC 307. This is going to be his fourth fight of the year 2024. And what did I say the odds were? I didn't yet. Buckley is the minus 275 favorite. Colby Covington the plus 235 underdog. I think that's... and again, for so many times, I feel like Colby was in this spot. And it's like, regardless, like, I think if Colby fought Leon again, it could go a different way. It could, because so little happened in that fight. But this is one where I think Buckley is ready for this step up. And for whatever reason that Colby is actually in this fight, I don't think it's a good matchup for him. You know, like, he's up there in age now to where, and Buckley is enough of a physical specimen. He's got some wrestling chops of his own. You know, like, Colby Covington will probably get him down a few times. I think that, like, that's going to be a big part of the plan. If he wants to stand and trade with Buckley, he's going to get banged up. It's not going to be like Leon, you know, where Leon seemed scared to fail or he seemed not that motivated. But if Buckley hits him, like, the damage is going to add up quickly. So, as far as method of victory goes, I honestly have no idea. We've seen Colby Covington survive some crazy onslaughts before. So, this fight going, you know, over 4.5 at minus 150, I think is very possible. The most important thing is, like, I do think to believe in Buckley against Colby Covington in this fight night main event. You know, like, Buckley really can make a run to, you know, up the rung here at welterweight. And he's doing that right now. Beating Colby Covington puts him on a short list of people, like, that are candidates for big fights. And maybe he fights Ian Gary. Like, there's so many options now that there's some of these guys actually fighting at welterweight, and there's some good names of interest. But, like, if Colby Covington wins, it's such a weird spot. You know, like, I think the UFC would put him in a big spot again, but they don't want to put him in a big spot again. Like, if they could against Ian Gary, I think they would. It seems like they want to do maybe, like, Ian versus Leon. That makes a little bit more sense. There's still some money that the UFC can make off of Colby Covington, but it doesn't require him to make a move up the rankings. Buckley has showed me enough in his move to welterweight and over these last 3 fights. I think, like, you know, maybe he could get a knockout. Maybe he could. Buckley by knockout, that's plus 145. By decision is plus 175. Maybe it is by... those are 2 really tough ones to draw. Because, like, if it's Colby, it's plus 325 by decision. But I'm not going the Colby Covington side on this one. God, this is so tough. I think Buckley does win this fight, like, right now, like, 65, 70 times out of 100. So, again, maybe the number is just a little bit inflated towards Buckley, but I've seen enough at welterweight. Against Luque, against Rizzy Bove, against Wonder Boy, even though... Luque, you know... Luque looked great this past Saturday. So, you know, I think what'll do Colby in is that it's not going to be as easy as maybe it should be to get Buckley down. Buckley will throw a good amount of volume of strikes. They'll hurt, and Colby's not going to be able to match it. So whether it ends by knockout, whether it goes to decision, like, if this was, like, over 2.5 or over 3.5, then, like, I feel, like, way better about that over. Over 4.5 is possible at minus 150. But, like, if Buckley could absolutely get a knockout in, you know, rounds 3 through 5. So, I don't know. In DFS, I prefer Buckley. You know, in a fight or in a card where there's not a whole lot of, like, DFS slam dunks I have seen. Besides, like, you know, Joel Alvarez, I'm sure, like, Sean Woodson might, like, work his way in there for me. But otherwise, like, not a ton of DFS people that, like, I'm feeling that strongly about. But here, like, I think it's very possible Buckley is, you know, I'm willing to spend the money on him on Saturday. Such a strange main event. Weird way for the UFC to cap off the year 2024 in what has been a weird year. And, folks, thank you so much for listening to episode 161 of RotoBallers' official MMA podcast, Tap That. But thank you very much for listening to Tap That through all of the year of 2024. I cannot wait to share the year of 2025 and all the UFC action that will come with all of you folks that are listening. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady for my picks on all things combat sports. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Look out for my MMA DFS Value Picks article that comes out on Friday afternoons. Come onto the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday. Let's talk about UFC Tampa as it's happening, what you're doing in DFS, who you're betting on. Folks, I'll see you in 2025. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks for listening. Have yourselves a great week. Have yourselves an enjoyable holiday season, and peace.